How's it going, guys? You got Mike at Fohse. I'm the grower liaison, and Siho, Chief Horticultural Officer here at Fohse. We've got Anthony Domeng, the grower liaison, social media coordinator, aficionado with us today. Then we got Scott Wall from New Age Laboratories. Scott, thanks for coming in and talking with us today.
My pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Cool. So we'll just jump into it. Scott, can you kind of give us an overview of what New Age Laboratories is, what you guys do, a little bit about your background, and we'll just get into it.
Oh, hell, that's a big subject.
We'll take it bit by bit, right?
So, New Age Laboratories is a broad-based analytical laboratory. Back in the 90s, we were a contracted mobile laboratory services lab. So very niche oriented. We worked mostly for NASA and EPA, Department of Defense, and we provided laboratories that were in trucks and trailers. So we went directly to wherever a spill or an environmental cleanup was going to take place. We went to railway derailment.
Yeah,
I was trying to put it all the way through. Or pipeline spills, those types of things. That's where we would be called in. So we'd bring the laboratory directly to the site.
Okay.
And then we would do expedited chemical analysis for environmental spills. Over time, we transitioned those skills and chemistry to working with agriculture. And then during the Obama administration, there was a big push to improve food safety in the United States. So adding in microbiology and tests along those lines, because in West Michigan, we're second only to California in the diversity of crops that we grow. So we just can't grow as long as California can, right? And so that's kind of how we evolved. And then COVID came along and legalized cannabis came along. And we transitioned our agricultural services and our food safety services into the legalized cannabis industry. So we could facilitate helping the cannabis grows in horticulture and agricultural services, preventing contamination in the finished flower with testing for heavy metals and yeasts and molds prior to the finished flower. Let's prevent it before it ever gets to there. And then, looking at E. coli and other things, if we're going to turn it into edibles, let's figure out how to make those facilities just as safe as all the other food entities that we have. Along those lines, we stumbled upon the concept of plant sap analysis. And it kind of came about because we were on bus tours with the West Michigan blueberry industry. And we started hearing about the concept of plant sap analysis, which was to take tissue or leaves from the blueberry bushes and extract the sap from the leaves and analyze it for nutrient uptake. And it was supposed to be done quick and fast so that you could see what the nutrient uptake for the blueberries were and then make needed adjustments to the amendments right away. So it was like a blood test for crops. Well, the problem was that the industry was sending all the samples over to the Netherlands, and it was taking 5 to 7 days to send it over. They had to get the result. And for something that had to be done quickly, they were getting old data just simply because of the logistics.
It started losing its value.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you were now making adjustments for data that was a week old or a week and a half old. So we knew we could do the analysis. We just didn't know exactly where the numbers needed to fall. So we started doing SAP analysis. And then we started building our own database. And from there, we grew to adding some knowledge through agreements with other SAP laboratories, and then that expedited our growth. And right now, given the number of years we've been doing it and the growth of the legalized cannabis in Michigan and then across the United States, we've probably got the largest database for cannabis sap analysis of anybody. Probably, definitely in the United States and North America, very likely in the whole world.
Very cool.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's only going to get bigger, and the more data that comes in, and the more collaboration we get, the stronger that data is going to become.
Yep, just refine it more and more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very nice.
Yep.
So I had a question. How does fertilizer, basically the type of fertilizer, whether it be an organic input or some type of soluble input, how does that play a role in basically what you see on the back end?
Could you tell from a Sap Analysis report if they're using salt-based or organics? I think is kind of a cool question to segue
essentially.
into.
Yeah. Well, sometimes
What are some
you can.
indicators then? Like
Well,
silicate level.
I would worry mostly about like levels of chloride. I mean, high levels of chloride are probably going to be associated with a salt-based fertilizer mix of some sort.
For sure.
And that's a big issue because, again, if you're familiar with like the Mulder charts for soils and how you have inhibitions in soils, same thing happens within the plant. Okay, so your anions, the chloride and sulfur and phosphorus and nitrate, think of it as a basket, okay? And you can only fit so many golf balls in that basket, okay? And you need to balance out between those anions. Well, if you're using a heavy salt formula, okay, and in that salt formula, you're using something that has a lot of chloride. And remember, we get told what's in it that we want. We don't get told what's in it that we don't really care about, like chloride, right?
Right.
So the plant easily takes up this chloride, and now we see this chloride in the sap. Well, when the chloride gets in there and it's at twice the level that the plant needs, it now inhibits the uptake of phosphorus, which we want for bud swell. And if it's in flower and we're creating this problem, and we have a deficient uptake in phosphorus or we have a deficient uptake in sulfur, now we're creating a problem in our cannabis grow because we can't get bud swell or we can't get secondary terpenes or enzymatics formed because we don't have enough sulfur. Or we don't have enough sulfur and we're affecting photosynthesis. So all these things come into play. If you're doing organics, you're hoping that it's coming through the uptake in the roots. You've got to make sure that you have good soluble sources. You have to be concerned about what your sources may be coming from. Some of the ocean sources, some of the kelp sources can be high in heavy metals like arsenic. So you need to be making sure that you're getting good sources for your organic amendments.
Organics you should test too beforehand. I've had stuff,
Always.
fish-based stuff that's just super high in heavy metals.
Absolutely.
Cannabis uptakes it so fast. it's pretty intense.
Well, and I think, one of the things that we were really cognizant of when the cannabis industry became legal in Michigan is that there's a lot of predatory behavior around the cannabis industry. People aren't afraid to jack their prices up for the cannabis industry, and I think that's inappropriate. If I sell to you as a tomato grower a test for $50, why should I sell the same test to him as a cannabis grower for twice that amount? But we see that same thing going on in amendments and so on and so forth. It's a green tax, right? Mm-hmm. And I think some of that goes on with amendments. We make things easy. We don't have as in cannabis. I don't know that we have the agronomic knowledge base in some of the grows that maybe we could have. How do we mix our own fertilizer sometimes? I know there's schools that say we could do that, but it may not give us as good a yield or potency, that kind of thing. There's others that say, hey, keep it simple. Let's go with the A/B formulas. I think there's drawbacks both ways.
For sure.
You pay for an A/B formula. You're paying for water to be shifted, or you're buying it in salt A, and you still have to mix it together, but you lose some flexibility. We were talking earlier about if you get a SAP report and it says, well, you're short on mag. You're deficient in mag uptake. Okay, keep that in mind that when we're talking about SAP analysis, we're talking about nutrient uptake. We're not saying that you're deficient in available magnesium. We're saying that the plant isn't taking it up.
Right.
Okay, so either we're inhibiting it because something's too prevalent and it's locking it out, or we don't have enough of it. Okay, so how do we adjust that with an A/B formula? And if it's being locked out by, say, potassium, and potassium is present in both our A and our B, we're limited.
Yeah.
So now you have to have other alternatives. And
Depends on the skill of your grower too, right? I mean,
Yep.
if you have a grower who can mix their own salts and pivot and adapt as you go through, it would make sense to mix your own salts.
Absolutely.
An A and B system, even if you're an advanced grower, though, it's an easy system or nutrient complex to use, right? But it limits you, just like you said,
there are pluses and minuses.
100%.
Yeah.
Of almost everything, too,
Yeah.
right, in the system. You brought up an interesting point of excess chloride creating less nutrient uptake of phosphorus.
Mm-hmm.
Have you, as you kind of refine the data, are you starting to see parameters of where that happens as far as ppm goes? So can you say at 50, 75 ppm is typically when we see excess chloride start locking up phosphorus, or is that?
Oh,
just
no, that'd
very-
probably be closer to 1,000.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's a pretty high number. To where
Yeah,
that
it's
actually
pretty
happens.
high. I mean,
Okay.
cannabis will accept quite a bit of chloride.
Okay.
It's a matter of getting it to a certain level that it now inhibits the other anions.
Okay.
We're already pushing, we want to push the phosphorus and we want to push the sulfur. And that's the other thing that we see with like the knowledge of moving from, from bro science to monitoring the data, is that, we used to think that we needed to have these astronomically high levels of phosphorus. Well, phosphorus can only really go into solution at a certain amount. It's not necessarily that we have to have a huge amount available. We just have to make sure that it's being taken up appropriately.
Yep.
But if it doesn't, it will fall behind pretty drastically.
Okay.
And we have to make sure that the plant has it at the right times. If we get phosphorus to the plant too early, we can get really stretchy plants. Phosphorus given to like Trop Cookie early on, if it's too much phosphorus, Trop Cookie will stretch terrible, and you'll get 6, 7, 8-inch internodes.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Okay, so you don't stack nice.
Nutrient steering, right?
Exactly.
Not even
one way to go
crop
about it.
steering,
Exactly.
light steering, nutrient steering.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you kind of have to hold back on that until you get it into flower and you actually see the flowers forming. Then you can hit it with the phosphorus.
Once you actually see flower development is when you want
Right.
to start pushing phosphorus, typically, right?
On that particular strain, yeah, because if you get it too early, you just won't get there.
Yep.
Now, look, we were at Steve Cantwell's this morning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you look at Steve's plants; he's got them trained. You don't see any stretchy plants there.
Yep.
Okay, but now that's very regulated by his system
His
too.
manipulation too, right?
His soil and his system really holds that back. It's not a fertigation system that can just supply a nutrient at 2.5, 2.7 EC.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
Yep.
But we can do that kind of thing in an enclosed greenhouse with a automated fertigation program, that type of thing.
Yep.
And so, and some strains will take it, and some strains don't. And that's the beauty that Sap Analysis and the cannabis industry has taught us about Sap Analysis, really,
Yep.
is that when we've got grow rooms where the environment is controlled, the lighting's controlled, The feed program across the room is set, and yet we've got 3 or 4 strains in that room. And then we do sap analysis on all 4 strains, and we see that the uptake across all 4 is totally different.
Yeah.
And it's reproducible. Then we've got the knowledge that says, okay, strains feed differently.
Yep.
And Wedding Crasher cannot handle, more than 2.3 EC.
Yeah.
At 2.5, it's burning. But apple fritters in that same room loved it and maybe could have taken more.
Yep.
These are the pieces that when we're starting to optimize grows, that we need to take those pieces of information and find more strains that fit with apple fritters, put them in the same flower room together.
Yeah.
And more like Wedding Crasher,
Exactly.
put them together.
Exactly.
And currently, one of the challenges there is that there's no database that's set up currently. So we're developing that database as a collective community, I guess, of growers.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. We're gonna build it collaboratively together. We're willing to share, if the data comes to us, we're sharing that out. So like last week when we were at the Soil Life Summit, we were sharing some of that information with what we see across some of these strains. And we're going to take that and as we can build these strain specific optimal levels, we're going to put that out there. And then if the growers and the consultants and the amendment companies, as they're sending in more data, they add data points that we're not requesting. Like you make sure that we know that it's an outdoor grow and that it's organic, and he makes sure that we know that it's a totally indoor grow, but he's got his lights at 1500 ppfd. Okay, well that's all data points. It's got to go in so that we can start doing the data analytics on it. Because maybe we're going to see something else in the data that we didn't anticipate. But if we don't have the recorded information, we won't be able to go back and say, okay, that's something we need to drill down into a little bit more.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. The willingness to share among cultivators is also a little bit of a tricky subject sometimes. Not everybody wants to share their successes if they do have it. So
yeah,
that's another factor there. But
one of the good points you brought up earlier too, and you were just talking about like how if you're doing SAP analysis and you have repeatable results too. One of the points that we were talking about earlier that I thought was really interesting and it made complete sense to me is within a double tier environment, within a tiered facility, within double, triple tiers, you tell people not to take samples from 2 levels at a time, right? And I think that's a huge thing to kind of touch on, is because it's almost sometimes a different grow environment as you get stratification, as you go up in tiers, as airflow changes, as temperature is different. Mm-hmm. So have you seen a great amount of variance between Wedding Crasher, let's say, that was grown on the bottom, versus Wedding Crasher that was grown on the top in the exact same room, where people are trying to make the exact same environment, the exact same feed?
Yeah.
There's nuance to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the same. So like when you're in that one room with 4 strains, you don't take samples from all 4 strains and put them in one sample because you wash out the data.
Right.
If this one's hyper aggregating phosphorus and this one's short on phosphorus, you put the 2 points together, you wash out the numbers. You don't know that this one's deficient and you don't know that this one's hyper aggregating. If you're in a multi-tier system, the microclimate between the lower tier and the upper tier are totally different.
Yep.
I don't care what anybody says.
What type of cool airflow system you put in.
Yeah, you can tell me that you've got the world's most sophisticated airflow system, but there are microclimates.
Yep.
And so sample them separately.
Yep.
Sample your lower tier separate from your top tier, and we've always seen differences between the two.
Which is crazy. And I think Armando brought it up from another podcast. He was talking about how HVAC and certain systems that are in grow rooms were developed for mammals, right?
Right.
These weren't developed for plants. They were developed for mammal comfort. Mm-hmm. So trying to use them in plants, there's going to be some discrepancies, some things you have to work through, right? So it's always interesting to see how that affects
Yeah.
the actual uptake of nutrients too, because typically people would think it's going to be similar, but it can be drastically different between the same cultivar in the same room, a few feet up.
We can't grow corn outside
Yeah.
and assume that the whole 100-acre field is the same. I don't know how we think we can get cannabis in a room and put it on 2 different tiers and deliver nutrients by noodles
Yeah.
and think that everything is going to be exactly right.
Yeah.
Emitters, the number of emitters, go to outdoor grows, go to indoor grows. The number of emitters that get clogged up
Yeah.
or broken or something like that, and just creating a program that to check emitters. If an emitter goes out or an emitter loses flow, that's a drastic change.
It's huge.
Absolutely.
And yet programs, standard operating procedures to make sure that every emitter or the majority of the emitters are working properly isn't always there.
Yep.
It's kind of a basic thing, but we assume that technology is always going to make things easier, and they do to some extent, but then they require a lot more follow-up on it.
Yeah, there's always that kind of bell curve with it too, and I think Catwell's Place is a good example of that. Someone who's still hand watering in a soil system, you would think there's a lot of labor associated with that. One of the things that always shocks me when I go there is you usually never see anyone in the rooms.
Very few.
I think he said he has, don't quote me on this if Steve's watching, but like two to three people basically running that grow.
Yeah, he's
Which is extremely impressive for a facility that's not necessarily automated and as far as irrigation and as far as a lot of other factors go.
But when you think about Steve's program, he's not wasting a lot of time with over defoliation.
Yep.
That's a huge labor cost.
Agreed.
That's another one of my soapboxes, and I won't get on that.
Oh, please don't. We've already no schwa there all day.
They don't waste a lot of time in filling pots.
Yep.
They're same soil.
True.
Now, what he was saying, 8 years now.
Yeah. They're almost on their 100th run.
100th run out of the same soil. The amount of money he's saving on that, and nutrients.
Yep.
So the fact that they're not constantly hauling stuff around and chucking stuff out and bringing more stuff in,
Yep.
the man hours and women hours that they're saving by that is astronomical.
Yeah. And I think people overlook that in tiered systems too.
Mm-hmm.
That second tier is not as easy to work on as that first tier.
Nope.
By a factor of it's almost double as hard.
Yeah,
Sometimes
absolutely.
using mechanical lifts or scissor lifts when you have to have 3 points of contact, trying to thin a plant with one hand like this. It just gets super interesting to deal with.
You
It
lose
certainly
scouting.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
100%. And you can, sometimes walk into a facility and see whose idea it was, the investors or the growers who developed this place.
Yeah.
And
I think
typically-
if you're truly limited, let's say your business plan says, look, this is how much space we can only build here.
Yeah.
We have to go up. We can't go out. Then fine, but make sure that you understand that you're going to have to put in
Absolutely.
SOPs or certain things to do this.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with vertical. We have a lot of successful clients growing vertically.
Mm-hmm.
I've run double and triple tiered facilities, so I can speak to the trouble with it, but also if you get it right, there also is some benefit to it as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do maximize the space that you're utilizing, but I think going into it with a plan is where people don't always go that route. So tiering veg for me is a no-brainer almost.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're not restricted on space, it's a way to maximize space so you can have room for other things. Maybe a bigger break room at the end of the day if you've got enough space for everything else. But it's always an interesting topic to get into.
Yeah. So I don't know. So where would you guys like to go with discussing plant sap analysis today?
I guess first, something that we can discuss is how does plant sap differ from taking dry leaf tissue? Just for those who may not know.
Okay. Well, so the biggest difference is that when you're taking samples for sap analysis versus dry leaf analysis is probably in the name of the dry tissue analysis, is that it's going to be dried. Okay, so you don't have to worry about retaining the moisture, okay? Whereas with sap analysis, what we're trying to maintain is the moisture that's within the tissue, Okay. So if we're doing sap analysis or we're doing dry tissue, both of them are probably going to collect the new tissue. Okay. So we want leaves that are from the newest fully formed adult leaves. Okay. Now, dry tissue is going to stop there. You're just going to collect the newest fully formed adult leaves. You're going to collect them up. If they've got foliars on them or something, you're going to wash those off and then put them in a paper bag. And if they dry up in shipping, you don't care. Okay? Because when they go to the laboratory, they're going to dry them out completely. They're going to reduce them in size, and then they're going to ash them and basically, and ashing them means they're going to actually burn them to the point that it's in ash, so that they can take the ash and dissolve it in acids so that it can go on for elemental analysis. There's nothing that you can look at from in that sample from a biological standpoint, only nutrients. And it's everything that was in that tissue at the time that they took it. Okay, it's in the cellular structure, it's in the mitochondria, it's in the fluids, everything. Okay, sap analysis, we're going to take that new, and then we're going to take an old. Okay, and we're taking those two levels within the plant, and we're going to put those into the Ziploc bags so that we can retain the moisture, and we're going to evacuate all the air out so that it doesn't continue to respirate. Get that to the lab as quickly as possible. Okay, so we send them overnight. When they get to the lab, we're going to apply lateral pressure on those samples, just to the point where the fluids in the vascular tissue can seep out of the leaves and the petioles, and that we can collect those up. What we don't want to do is crush the cells, okay? Because if we start crushing the cells, now we're getting into the chloroplasts and the vacuoles of all the cells, and we're going to bias certain elements high, like potassium and phosphorus and some of the micronutrients, because we're getting into the fluids that are in the cellular structure. We only want to see what's in the vascular tissue, what's in the blood system, okay, of the plants, the xylem and the phloem. Okay. Now we don't care about what the mass of the leaf was. We're looking at the concentration within this fluid, okay, the xylem and the phloem. And the xylem is kind of what you would anticipate when you talk about farmers in Maine collecting sap for maple syrup. Okay, it's what moves from the roots up to the shoots and the leaves and back down. Right. Okay, that's what they're tapping into the tree for. Phloem is that sap that went out to the leaves, and now the leaf has taken sunlight and turned those nutrients and pieces into sugars and complex proteins and amino acids and so on and so forth. And those pieces can get moved throughout the plant. Okay, it can go to fruits, it can go to other tissues, it can be moved from the new tissue to the old tissue, it can go down to the roots. A great deal of the sugars produced in the leaves go out to the roots as root exudates. As a feedback cycle, the plant actually tells the microbes in the root structure, this is what we need back. This is where Steve Cantwell's
Another
system
reason
works.
to not overthin, right?
That's right. Don't overthin, because the plant is putting out root exudates, telling the microbes around the roots, this is what we need back. So then those microbes mineralize the nutrients that they need. That's what comes back up in the xylem, and it's a feedback system. So we're going to look at these two in sap analysis, okay? And it's the blood of the plant that we're looking at. And we're looking at the concentration within these two. And because of what's in the phloem, we're looking at the mobility of the nutrient, okay? And in mobile nutrients like phosphorus or potassium, if the plant is taking up more than it needs, and it doesn't need it in this critical location in the new tissue, it's going to store the excess in the old tissue. It becomes a warehouse, okay? And it'll hold it in that older tissue until it needs it. Let's say the uptake later on at week 5 or 6 falls off for some reason. Well, it can go into this older tissue and pull that up into the flower where it needs bud swell, and it's not getting enough from the root system. Okay? And so it takes it out of the warehouse and moves it up there. It's a mobile nutrient. It can repartition it. Dry tissue can't tell you that. Dry tissue is a one-off. And so if it was the other way around and it wasn't getting sufficient, it pulls these nutrients from here, and you fall behind in concentration. That's where Sap Analysis has exceptional power, because if I tell you that your phosphorus has to be between 200 and 400 ppm, that's the optimal range, but you're growing chili lime OG, okay, and your chili lime says, no, I want to be at 550 in phosphorus. Well, don't listen to me. listen to your grow.
Right, exactly.
It's much more important for you to look at where your grow wants to be under your grow conditions than any number that we'll ever set. And every strain is different, so you look at what your grow wants to do. Dry tissue can't do that.
Okay.
Dry tissue seems a little bit more retroactive. Plant sap analysis seems a little bit more proactive.
Absolutely.
You're seeing stuff happen real time. You can make adjustments. Where dry tissue, it's like, oh, maybe we'll do that next run.
Dry tissue is a post-mortem.
Yeah, there you go.
It's for all. It's mass balancing. This is all the nutrients taken up. Okay, did we have enough there? We'll need this much more for next time. But like I was telling you, when you're looking at macronutrients in the percent level, the difference between 2% and 4% is 20,000 ppm. That's a huge range of nutrient.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh.
So sufficiency ranges so I always find it funny that we talk about sufficiency ranges in dry tissue in percent so that we feel better about the fact that, oh, well, we're only off by a 0.1%. Well, that's 1,000 ppm right there,
Right. Yeah, using percentages is definitely a coping mechanism.
It is. Yeah, exactly.
So being that it is like blood, and that blood is something that, can fluctuate as far as like with the data you receive when you take blood. Sap analysis also, the plant is going to be metabolizing differently at different times of the day. So what kinds of other limitations does plant sap analysis present?
Well, I think like any data. Well, let me back up. We were talking today when we were driving around. The critical piece for sap analysis is don't think of it as a one-off analysis. Sap analysis you work with over time. You build up trend lines. You build up history on your grow and how you can learn about your management from the data that the plants are communicating to you. It's about learning the language of your plants and what they're telling you.
For sure.
Okay. It's a process too, right?
It is.
It's not just a one
it's
fixed
very
solution.
much a process. And so when you talk about variability, in any data, in any science, it's about removing static in your data. Remove the noise from what you're doing. And so you have to think about what you're doing when you collect samples that can add noise to your data. So if you collect your samples at varying times of the day, well, you're adding noise to your data that isn't specific to what you're trying to do. Right. Now, unless you're trying to do a study that says, okay, well, let's look at sap levels at varying times of the day, that's fine. That's a different. Now you're looking for something specific. But if I'm trying to figure out what the nutrient uptake for this strain is, you should try to sample that room and those strains at the same time or close to it all the time.
For sure. So it's a lot about properly managing the data that you're receiving, and again, taking that data and using it over time after you've taken samples from veg to flower and so forth.
Yeah.
Throughout a few runs in the same conditions, in the same room, same cultivar.
Yeah.
comparing and contrasting that data you're getting to.
Yep.
Can you walk us through just a general process of taking SAP analysis?
Sure.
You bring up a lot of good points and when we were going through about how many families you need, about the size, the duration of time from lights on that you want to take that sample. Some of just kind of the general guidelines if we have some growers out there who are interested in taking plant sap analysis themselves.
Sure. And we have a sampling guide that we can always get out to anybody who's
Absolutely.
looking. So first of all, what you want to do is if you come down from the apical growth point about the fifth growth node, and the best thing I can say is the leaf that you're going to sample should be big enough for you to give a high five to. Okay, if it's not, then it's probably too small. It's not fully photosynthesizing. It's not fully developed and fully formed. Go down to the next leaf. Okay, that's going to be your new growth. Okay, take the petiole and the leaf, and then you're going to go across that strain within that room and collect up 80 grams. Now, if the leaf is the size of my hand, that might be 50 leaves. Okay, if they're slightly smaller, it might be closer to 70 leaves. As long as you're within 80 grams plus or minus 20%, which
Okay.
gets you down to about 64 grams, that's going to be enough mass for us.
Okay.
And you're going to slide that into your Ziploc bag, express all the air out, and seal that up. Label it new, the strain, the time, all that good data that you want to have on there. And then you're going to go across that grow, and you're going to come up from the bottom, and you're going to collect the oldest, still viable leaf off those grows. Okay. Now, viable means it's not totally senesced. It's not totally yellow.
Still
Okay.
photosynthesizing, right?
Still photosynthesizing. Now, we looked at a leaf today that had some chlorosis on it. If you see chlorosis that's occurring, take those samples.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's a good indication that there might be, some macronutrient, mobile nutrient, if it's at the bottom, that's being taken up in a deficiency state, and that's the piece of information that we want. That goes back to that defoliation. No, don't defoliate too much because that's that message that plant wants to tell you. And if you take that leaf off too early, you might not know that.
Yeah. Fitting for,
Yep.
adequate airflow to make sure
Yep.
pass out a problem, I think needs to be the main focus.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes you get a little bit more penetration throughout your canopy
Right.
if that's what you're going for. But there needs to be a thought behind defoliation, which
Right.
I think some of these people don't have.
Then put that in your Ziploc bag, seal it up, label it as old, the strain, time, so on and so forth. Now that's your pair. You've got your SAP sample submission form. Fill that all out. Put it in your variety. Put all the information on there that's relevant to that pair. And then you're going to ship that to us overnight.
Okay.
Okay.
And then for time constraints, when you want to take samples from when lights go on.
I would recommend that you do it within an hour to 2 hours after lights on.
Okay.
And we've got kind of control of that with controlled environmental agriculture. If it's an outdoor grow, try to hit it from half an hour after sunrise to no later than about 11 o'clock.
Okay. And can you jump into the kind of reasoning? Why is that the best time to take those?
Well, you want to make sure that the sap has risen up into the plant. So you've got to allow sunrise to come up. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then you don't want to wait too late in the day because then you start getting the possibility of stomatas closing down and so on and so forth. And just consistency, temperature-wise, those are the keys that you want to avoid.
Okay.
Greenhouses, pretty much the same thing. Sun up, try to get it between sunrise and 2 hours. 11 o'clock. If it gets too hot, now you're starting to push problems.
Okay.
So, if you've got a lot to sample, the most important thing is be consistent.
Yep.
If you can't get to a particular room until 11 or a particular field until 11:30, just do it at 11:30 consistently.
Yep.
It might not be the most ideal, but at least it's consistent and you're not going to add noise into the data.
Yeah, more variability.
Right. Exactly.
Is there any commonalities that you see with people doing plant sap? Like they're always calcium deficient, or they're always this, or just some things that you've started to notice as you kind of, get more and more growers involved with this process? Is there anything that jumps out as something that someone could?
For cannabis specifically, right?
Yeah, cannabis, even like salt-based versus organics, or is there just like an overarching theme that you see?
I think the overarching themes that we tend to see, I think there tends to be too much application of potassium.
Okay.
Particularly with the AB formulas.
Okay.
The cannabis plant just doesn't need that much potassium. We're not filling out a fruit. We're not filling out a vegetable. And it takes up the potassium very readily. Well, then when we get that much potassium uptake, it blocks out magnesium, and we need mag. Yeah. And so we end up with mag deficiency, not because we don't have mag available, it's just that we have way too much surplus potassium.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't need to be there.
Which is kind of why you highlighted nutrient uptake versus talking about a deficiency or an excess, because there might be enough magnesium.
Right.
It's just there's too much potassium for that to be uptaken.
Yeah. And that can cause problems with our calcium too. And so when we mentioned anion buckets or balance. Well, cation balance is the same thing. So calcium, potassium, magnesium, and ammonium. Sodium would be in that bucket too, but sodium's not really one that we care about too much. But if potassium gets extremely high and it blocks out mag and calcium, well, now these are two that we really critically need to have.
Yep.
We've got to have mag in order to form chlorophyll. We've got to have calcium when we're trying to create trichomes. So if we've got all this potassium, we're inhibiting calcium and mag, we're really kicking ourselves in the ass.
Well, and it's funny to think now. I mean, a lot of people you see or growers you talk to, the master grower response is, you just need to add CalMag, bro.
I was just about to say that. So
it's funny that maybe this conversation is now going to switch over to, you just need less potassium, man.
Right.
We do, exactly. And CalMag's not a great additive because CalMag's high in chloride.
Yeah.
So
a lot of shooting yourself in the foot.
You can, exactly. Looking for alternative forms of what we do sometimes is really, it's critical to know what else is there, not just what it is that you want to get.
Yeah, you don't want to solve one problem and create two more at the end of the day too, so.
Well, we see a lot of people struggling with fusarium right now. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things we see, one of the things that we see about how do we prevent fusarium, eliminate excess nitrogen.
Okay.
What do we see? A whole lot of nitrogen.
Yeah.
When by the time you get close to week 8, week 9 in indoor growth, most everybody has excess nitrogen.
Yeah.
And then the whole point is that we're going to get to week 7 and start flushing.
Yep.
Why did we build up all that excess nitrogen in the first place? We didn't need it.
Definitely a waste.
So why aren't we steering for that? Why aren't we controlling that? Exactly. And hopefully preventing something like fusarium or something else. Aphids, thrips, other things that could be causing trouble.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And not enough calcium, certain things like that too, that can create things like bud rot. And you've seen that probably in various crops, right? I heard you talking about peppers.
Oh,
and what does that create?
Yep. I mean, if you're, peppers are known for being hyperaggregators of potassium. Well, the way to control that is to increase manganese. Manganese regulates the uptake of the potassium. It's not that the calcium's not there. The calcium's being blocked by the potassium uptake because it's hyperaggregating it. The only way to control the uptake of the potassium is to increase your manganese uptake. Once you get manganese to a certain concentration in the sap, the potassium falls back. You open up the door for the calcium to come in.
And within the medium, I think you were explaining before, you'll have sections where there's different concentrations of different nutrients too. So were you saying
striating of nutrients.
Were you saying that manganese usually settles more towards the top where you don't have as much root mass, or what was
in like pots and stuff like that, where we've got soil amendments and stuff like that, or even cocoa or core or something along those lines. When we're fertigating or when we're bringing nutrients in, potassium and nitrogen and stuff, they're all going to leach towards the bottom of those pots. Well, that's where our water's going. That's where our root zone's going to go. Our roots are, when you harvest cannabis, I would challenge folks to when you harvest it, don't just throw it away. Pull that root mass out, wash off all the dirt, take a photograph of the root structure, and see where all your roots are.
Yeah.
Because that's where it's taking nutrients from. Well, then do a segmented sampling of your soils and figure out where your nutrients are in the pots, because that's where it's feeding.
Yeah.
And you were right, in some of the stuff that we've done, things like molybdenum and some of these micronutrients, they don't leach.
Yeah.
They stay up towards the top. Well, when you do that root analysis, you'll find there's not very many roots at the top,
Yeah.
unless for some reason that plant was totally
Just doing real small shots
had terrible root structure. All it is this knot of, it's this one knot of roots or something like that. Then it's got bigger problems than not getting molly.
100%.
Yeah. So yeah, I think, and that's the problem with micronutrients. Micronutrients are almost always deficient, but conventional ag doesn't really consider micronutrients important.
Yeah.
But when the plant is making a complex molecule, an organic molecule, it's got the macronutrients and it's putting these proteins and things together. When it comes along and it needs zinc or it needs copper or it needs iron, if that molecule isn't available, isn't sitting right there, it's not going to go tear apart something else to put it together. That protein just breaks apart. So all that energy that put into that, it's gone. It doesn't replace it with another molecule.
Okay.
So we see a lot of deficiencies in micronutrients, and I think finding good micronutrient availability for in nutrient packages is difficult.
Yeah, and just like when we were speaking at Steve's, the volume of watering and how that's applied is a huge factor as well.
Sure.
You can leach out a lot of the nutrients if you're overwatering.
Mm-hmm.
You could have them at different levels. There's a whole
You can
bunch
waterlog. You can see, and
Yeah,
you can
and that's
see a lot of that show up. Some of those things show up in your data.
Okay. How would you see that on a plant sap analysis?
So you look at your EC. So another thing that you don't see in dry tissue, right? These metabolic parameters. So your electric conductivity in sap. If your electric conductivity in the sap is extremely high, well, now that means you've got salts building up in the sap. Now either you're way overfeeding,
Yeah.
or
You're
you're not watering enough.
Yeah.
And now the sap is becoming overly concentrated.
Okay.
So now you know something about your irrigation program. If it's the other way, if it's way diluted, maybe you're overwatering.
Or not feeding enough, right? So at least
Right.
you have that
Exactly.
to start with. That's
Yep.
interesting.
Very interesting. I want to see you get into some of this data here that you have.
Okay.
We'll throw this up on the screen, so we'll just take an example from here.
Okay.
And if you could kind of just give us your thought on one SAP analysis report, we'll edit it in so people can see and we can start to understand kind of how to analyze these reports.
Sure.
And
Well,
then we'll also push in, we're going to take samples at Revity tomorrow, so you guys will see that live.
there wasn't a ton. This happened to be from the Soil Life Summit from
Yeah.
last week. And yeah, I brought it in for you because I had hoped that you were going to be there, but
Yeah, I got it.
you backed out. No, I understood. So here's a great example. And this year we've made some adjustments to the SAP report, trying to make it more intuitive for the reader. So again, the light bars on the SAP report are the concentration or for the new tissue, and the dark green bar is the concentration in the old tissue. Okay. In the mobile nutrients, which are going to be in your macros mostly, your anions and your cations, if the nutrient is in excess and it's greater than, it's 20% or more, that bar is going to be shaded in blue. The whole nutrient bar is going to be shaded in blue, and there's going to be a calculated percentage over on the side. Okay, now that's telling you that in the relationship between the new and the old, we've calculated out the relative difference between the two, and we're telling you that it's 20% or more in excess uptake, and it's something that you probably are going to have either an inhibition or it's something you could do about maybe dialing that nutrient back. If it's the other way around and it's 20% or more in deficiency, it'll be shaded in pink and it'll have a negative percentage on the far right hand side. So now that tells you that, hey, you really need to take some kind of action because this is getting to the point where it's going to definitely affect your yield or your potency or something along those lines. And you might want to look at, okay, if you've got blue and pink in the same bucket, the anions or the cations, you might have an inhibiting factor going on here between one element or another. If you don't have that situation, you may want to look at a micronutrient that might have a protagonist or an antagonist relationship with those macros. So it kind of starts feeding you in directions that you might want to be looking for as how things might go along.
Start to define those correlations.
Right, yeah. Now there's also another one. If that bar is shaded in yellow, what that's telling you is that the concentrations in the sap are so low, they haven't even achieved 70% of the optimal range. Okay.
Wow.
And therefore, everything we've taught you about interpreting the relationship between the new and the old, don't pay attention. You're in such a deficit situation that you can't count on the interpretation between the relationship there. And you need to take it as caution. And if you see yellow all the way down, you probably got a problem with your sampling or some other major issue that you need to address.
Should reevaluate your career choices.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Could be. It could be. Yeah. So I think that's a big one there. Let's see, there's another piece back here.
You offer kind of more than just plant sap too, right? So can you talk about, I know at Remedy tomorrow, kind of one of the main goals is we're going to go take their inflow feed, a sample of that, and then we're going to take their drain feed, and we're going to compare that with plant sap analysis.
Okay.
Can you kind of walk us through how to put both of those together as far as analyzing them and then pulling conclusions from that?
Yeah, so if you're using a fertigation program, then sap analysis tied in with your fertigation program gives you just a ton of information for dialing in your nutrient program. So you know what you're feeding in is on a concentration, okay? You've got your data for your uptake in your sap analysis, and then you've got drain data, right? Now, typically when folks look at their drip and their drain, they just look at the concentrations, and I've never had anybody really truly explain this to me, how they look at their drip and their drain and they magically look at that and say, oh, aha, it's perfect. Because the drain is always this number that's more concentrated than their feed line in. So I'm sure somebody has told them, well, it should be in this range. Right? But it never makes any sense. So my feed in is 200 ppm and my drain out is 600. What does that tell you about whether or not you've got enough going in or not? It just means you've concentrated it.
Right.
So what you really need to do is you take these two, you figure out, okay, I've got, let's say on that table you're putting in, I don't know, let's say you put in 150 liters of water, okay, and you collected 30 liters of water. Well, you know that the plant took up X number of liters of water. That went into evaporation, it went into photosynthesis. Now you've got to take that extra 120 liters of water, add that back into your drain. That now dilutes down that concentration. And you can actually see, okay, this is what I had in, this is what I had out, and am I satisfied? Is the plant satisfied? If it is, and it's not in excess, but I still have a little bit in the drain, if I have too much in the drain, I can dial this back.
Right.
If I'm deficient in uptake and I'm not seeing it down here, well, then I need to bump it up. if I've got a sufficient amount in here and I've got nothing down here, well, then I'm fine. I can just hold off. So there's different ways to read these 4 pieces of data together, but you do have to adjust this number down on your drain. Otherwise, you can't tie them all together.
For sure.
And I think that's critical piece.
Yeah, and Sap Analysis is great to get that middle piece of what is actively going on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually pulling from that too.
Right.
You can break that down as far as the nitrogen and the nitrogen out, correct? All the way down to
Yeah, because you're going to look at your ammonium, you're going to look at your
everything
nitrates.
in and out. So it's not just this is your EC in, this is your EC out.
No, that's to me. I mean, I get why all the monitoring companies and stuff use EC because it's an easy one to gauge. Gauge your pH, gauge your EC. But in all these programs that, if they had recycling nutrients and stuff, well, the program refilled the EC based off of formula. Mm-hmm. But the plants don't eat on formula.
Yeah.
The plants eat based off of what they need.
Yeah.
Well, if it took out a lot of potassium, but didn't take out much mag, or actually take out the other way, it took out a lot more mag, it didn't take out as much potassium, it comes back here, well, it refills based on formula, so it puts in just as much potassium and just so much mag, but it was deficient in mag. So now it's the formula going back to the plant the next time is more deficient in mag. It takes out mag and it's cycling back. And by the end of the week, this formula is so far off that
Yeah, that would be cool if someone was able to figure out how to real time adapt that formula based on what's coming back in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was about to say some sort of like.
Yeah, you dropped off this much ppm and magnesium, so it feeds that back into the system instead of just that normal solution that it's used.
But you'd have to do that by every strain.
Yeah.
It would get tedious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'd have to know, okay, well, he's got core, but you've got living soil.
True.
Or you've got rock wool.
So we just have to use people like you who are going to tell us this information.
Well,
Right.
Whether we're wasting nutrients and sending money down the drain, right? Or whether we're leaving money on the table by not giving the plant what it needs.
I think I think the key is that the tools that we're using in the grow, like EC meters, like pH meters, we still need to use it.
Absolutely.
Like Aurora, I think their systems of monitoring all these things are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I think the key there is we need to tie more of those real-time continual monitoring devices with data like SAP analysis. Absolutely. So that we get all this real-time great data, and then we tie in the SAP data to say, okay, this is what the detailed look ties in with this drawdown and EC, and now it strengthens the whole program.
Yep.
We can correlate. Now I can correlate my EC to the lab EC on the SAP, or I can do Brix meter. I can go in and do a Brix meter every 2 weeks or every other day on this plant to see where's my Brix, and get a feel for how do I improve that, but tie it in with the Brix coming from the lab.
Yeah, they're all just pieces of the puzzle, right?
It's all together. It's how much, where do we want to go? How do we want to refine growing exceptional cannabis?
Yeah.
Exceptional cannabis all the time.
And I think it's taking the right tests and doing the right things too, right? Because I think we've gone through and we've seen some growers do this where they get basically data paralysis. Where you're taking too much data. Where you're taking plant sap from every strain in a 100,000 square foot facility every week. And then the grower is sitting down trying to articulate, how do I now optimize 30 strains with all of these variabilities in the system I'm currently running, right?
Yeah.
It become overwhelming.
It is.
You become prone to adjusting parameters too fast before you figure out the actual root cause, I would say, as well.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, and that part, part of the problem is that oftentimes grows don't start doing SAP analysis until they've got a lot of problems.
Yeah.
It's never incorporated into the standard operating procedure to say, okay, it'll be our point of continual improvement. It's, hey, we've got major issues going on. So then the goal is we've got to get it fixed, and we've got to get it fixed now. Well, that's not really the best way to utilize it. It's not gonna. You're not gonna take a SAP analysis and it's automatically gonna say, do this. You're gonna take it. It's gonna say, yeah, you've got some deficiencies here, you've got some excesses here, but is that gonna be the case every time?
Right.
On every strain, and what is the cause for that deficiency or excess? Is it a root aphid issue? Is it fusarium? Is it your nutrient program? Is it the fact that you just shit canned your head cultivator 3 weeks ago and you didn't tell us that? We don't know these pieces of information.
Right.
You changed your nutrient amendment. Maybe somebody's not managing your RO program, your RO water right.
There's a lot of places to look in situations like that, and it's I'm going to bring up this analogy again. I know I'm beating it into the ground today, but it's almost like going to the doctor, right? Mm-hmm. Some people will go for regular checkups every 3 to 6 months. Some people will only go wrong when they're bleeding out of their eyes,
right,
or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are probably coming to you at that stage, and then it's like, well, there's probably several issues, right? So now we have to start kind of looking everywhere, looking at all these sources. Whereas if you were getting regular checkup and plant sap was built into your SOPs, you're able to have a standard of data to where if things start to fluctuate, it's now easier to track down that source than tracking down 9 different things that are going wrong.
Everything can't be a brush fire.
Yeah.
If everything's a brush fire, pretty soon you have an inferno.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, Scott, where do you place an importance on frequency as far as like what is the optimal cadence if somebody were to hypothetically make an SOP in collaboration with you?
I like to see SAP analysis done every 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay.
Now,
and that's a minimum?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah. I like to see one in veg, and then from that one in veg, you can skip a week. Because I don't see any point in doing the first week in transfer. Because that plant needs time to transition from going from one light time to another light time. And if you're changing the feed program at the same time, now it's really
sometimes people are going on the slabs or
exactly
clouding the data for sure.
So then give it 2 weeks to transition, then get another one. And let's assess it here. This first one in the flower usually tells us an awful lot. Because it can have excesses, but it can also start showing because it came out of veg, usually with excess. Almost entirely, it'll always come out of veg with excess. The key is learn where your excesses are coming out of veg, so that you can see if you can't fix this so that it's right. But get this, you got to get this transition feed figured out, because sometimes we just move it from here to flower and we put it on a flower.
Right.
And it's not ready for that.
Yeah, too much phosphorus, you'll get a stretchy plant in some cultivars, like you said.
Yeah, and all of a sudden you get this real big drop, and all the things kind of drastically shift. And then you need to then monitor it every 2 weeks. By the time you get to week 7, you're done. Most people are going to flush. Depending on what your opinions are on flushing, that's about the end of it. You're in the home stretch, right?
For sure.
So, but I think week 2, week 4, week 6, week 8. If you were week 8, you could get into a week 8. That's about 5 samplings across an indoor grow, and I think that would be about right.
Yeah, and that's a great reference as far as looking back at your previous grows and really getting timestamps of what happened and when.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then tie that in. The key is to tie that in with what are your management tasks on all those weeks.
mm-hmm.
So if you defoliate at day 21, well, great, because week 2 is in front of week 20 in front of 21, so that's good. You might be a little bit hard pressed to get a sample at week 4. So maybe you drop it and you go to week 5. So you're going to be 3 weeks before you get that next one at week 5, because you want a little bit more growth. Because that fits your management style. Okay. Don't make it harder to collect sap. Okay, it's going to take labor. Just don't make it harder than it has to be, because if you make it harder, you'll stop doing it. Okay.
For sure.
Also, pick out, in my opinion, pick 2 to 4 strains, no more, when you first start, and figure out 1 to 2 issues that you say are your biggest issues that you need to fix.
Is there, when they're selecting what cultivars to test, should you look for something that you know is a heavy feeder versus something that you know isn't? Versus, is there any kind of parameters you would give someone as far as selecting what they're going to select?
I usually recommend that they figure out if they could fix this one cultivar or this one strain, it would drastically drastically affect their bottom line.
Okay.
You know, if they could fix that strain, it would make a big difference in their brand.
Okay.
Or, hey, this is our top seller, and if we can just make it better, that's the one we want to fix.
Okay.
So try to keep those in mind when you pick the first 2. You know, this is our biggest seller. Okay, we sell more of this than anything. Okay, well then fine, let's do that one and get it really just dialed in.
Yeah.
And then pick one that you're having trouble with that you say, boy, if we got that one, people love it, but we just have a struggle growing it. So pick that one. Now you got 2. You got one that you struggle with and one that you don't struggle with, but you sell a lot of.
Yeah.
Pick those 2.
Some of those most profitable strains is also probably going to be how they're steering that whole room, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if that room has the most profitable strain and it's got 2 or 3 other ones, you're obviously going to want to steer it towards the best growth for that genetic too, right? So that makes absolute sense.
And now you can get a feel for what you've got going on. Once you got those 2 kind of dialed in a little bit, then you can choose in 2 more.
Okay.
And maybe pick another one that you're having problems with, and another one that's the next one down on, boy, this is the next one we sell a lot of volume on. And you keep monitoring the other 2 and you add the next 2 in, because you've grown accustomed to looking at the data. You're going to add 2 more in, so now it's not overwhelming, and you're starting to build up a protocol, knowledge of how to look at data.
Yep.
And it's a lot easier.
Nice.
Yeah.
You're constantly evolving, and I think I've seen that even from the charts that you're giving out, and making it easier for growers to read and to adjust and to make actionable change. Can you walk us through kind of what you guys are looking for as far as evolving the next step and what you guys are doing with plant sap analysis?
I think the next, other than the reports that we've done that I was just talking about, the next things that we're really working on is taking that percent excess and that percent deficiency and starting to trend line it, so that we used to take the concentration in the new and the concentration in the old and trend line that over time. And so you had to be able to interpret, okay, well, if the old's higher than the new, well, then that means I have excess. Well, now we've boiled that down to this percent excess or percent deficiency, and it's a single line. And so if it's above the 0 line, it's excess. If it's below the 0 line, it's a deficiency. And now we can see a little bit more data on one graph without it being quite so busy. I think that's an improvement. Now, taking that data and maybe by the end of the year moving it to an electronic platform with a portal for the growers.
Nice.
I think that would be critical.
Okay.
So that they don't have to necessarily get online with me all the time. That they can actually get on and with a subscription or whatever, say, hey, I want to look at my trend lines for this strain over this in this room, and be able to maybe look at it and maybe compare it to another room or compare it to another strain.
Yeah.
And see if it's doing the same type of thing.
And can you walk us through, we were chatting earlier about testing for carbon. Can you walk us through?
I can walk you through it. I'm not sure what I know, but I don't know what we're going to...
We don't know what we're going to find, but it's going to be a cool new addition to,
So that's one thing that we're going to add this year, is that we're going to add an instrument in that we currently do total nitrogen by a combustion method. And while we're adding a new instrument from LECO that will do the total nitrogen, but it's also going to do total carbon analysis at the same time. Now, we won't be able to do this on all sap analysis because we're going to divide it up between the two, but we're going to start looking at that total carbon number and see what that window looks like. What do we see through that window?
What conclusions can we draw from
exactly?
this data, right?
You know, we were talking about that with Steve out at his grow. He's looking at a form of regenerative agriculture. You know, he's living soils. So one important thing with regenerative agriculture is carbon sequestration. Well, that carbon sequestration is CO2 being stripped through photosynthesis and that carbon being pushed back down into the soil as root exudates. Well, that's an indicator of photosynthesis efficiency.
Yep.
Well, what might the carbon in the sap, total carbon, tell us about how we can gauge photosynthesis efficiency? And how will that correlate with yield or potency or terpene yield, specifically for cannabis? And we don't know that.
Yeah, it's awesome going into that with an open mind. We're going to start testing for it, but we don't know what conclusions to draw because it leaves you open to seeing, what's going to happen.
Yeah, and we were talking last weekend with Dave Olson, looking at with bioamendments, looking at sap from root systems and seeing where certain growth hormones, what are the concentrations of gibberellas and some of the other growth hormones, what's going on there as far as that in root exudates and stuff, and what can that tell us about cannabis and cannabis growth, and particularly in regenerative ag and so on and so forth. So the science of us using sap analysis, I think, is only just starting. And we don't look at sap within individual cells, but we look at it from more of a macro standpoint. Yeah.
Very cool. I'm excited for that. It's gonna be
Me
cool
too.
to see.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't think I got anything else.
Me either.
Anything else you want to touch on?
I think probably most important to you guys, and this is where I'm excited, is to start looking at nutrient uptake and variabilities relative to light intensities
100%.
and light spectra.
Yep.
We know that the plant feeds differently from strain to strain. Well, what are the differences with feed uptake based on light level?
Yeah. And what I'm going to do for our clients now is make sure that they're putting those light levels on when we're sending in samples.
Data points.
Yeah.
Data analytics.
If we can get the spectrum that they're utilizing under our fixtures, the light levels,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be able to start drawing conclusions after some point, right?
Yep. Yeah. It's going to take a couple hundred or more data points on any one strain to really get some vision there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's all there. We just have to start collecting the data, putting it together.
Definitely.
So
Cool.
excellent. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining in on our podcast with Scott Wall and Tony Domingue. Until next time. That's all I got.
Pieces.
You can cut Leo into that
Pieces.
extra. He's good at the intro extra. I got the meat and potatoes.
Okay, I got to use the restroom. I was sitting here starting.
Oh, yeah.
I got to move.